Welcome to the first of the public programs here for the June 2020 residency here at the Lesley MFA, MFA in Visual Arts program. I'm the director of the program, Ben Sloat. Our general thematic for this residency is social abstraction, which considers a spectrum of abstractions present in our social fabric, as well as the means to process, transform, and artistically respond to these social contexts. Our programs continue tomorrow with a talk by the painter and activist Carrie Moyer, Tuesday by the mixed media sculptor Ursula von Weidingsward, Wednesday with our visiting faculty Anthony Romero, and Thursday with the mixed media artist Eric and Mac. I hope folks watching on YouTube live stream on the front page of our website can join us for those programs. Today's program will start with my faculty talk, which will be about 40 or 45 minutes on art value and social abstraction, and will be followed by remarks by the esteemed art critic, Jerry Saltz. Recently in April, he wrote the article, The Last Days of the Art World and Perhaps the First Days of the New One. And so I'm excited to hear what Jerry has to say on whatever he wants. Personally, I've been following Jerry's writing carefully since his days at the Village Voice, and I've come to appreciate the diversity and insights of his thinking. Right now at present, it's been really gratifying to see him process our historical moment for art in real time. And his writings about art and COVID, he also gives a kind of larger historical context. So he talks about what the art world was like for him decades earlier, and perhaps giving us tools to think about how we can progress forward. Also, I really enjoy seeing his posting on social media where he's very active, posting some of his earlier essays, like his recent posting of the Cy Twombly shows he wrote about at Gagosian in 2017. Saltz is a senior art critic at New York Magazine and received the Pulitzer Prize for criticism in 2018. His latest book, titled How to Be an Artist, was published in March. So Jerry, can you turn your video on and say hello, and we'll give you a round of applause. Hi, Jerry. Thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to have you speak to our community today on these really important topics. I'm going to unmute you. You're still muted. Okay, we can hear you now.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and I can't wait to hear Ben's lecture and then blow it. So
Great.
See you later.
All right, see you, Jerry. Also, folks will have the opportunity to ask questions. Folks in our community can ask those questions via the chat box, and please ask questions to Jerry, because you can always ask me questions later. So, okay, I'm going to start. So, I gave a talk on, art and the value economy at Harvard in April. And it was a completely different era then. And I'm sort of struck in a lot of ways by how different things have become now as to where they were even 2 months ago. And we're really in a process where we're thinking about systems and structures, how those structures privilege certain folks and marginalize other folks. Where do the structures of inequality and kind of historical oppression and colonialism and police violence and how a lot of these kind of conditions can be thought about in a larger form of social abstraction. So I wanted to start with this quote by Mark Bradford, who talks about, I think there are other ways of looking through abstraction to use the whole social fabric of our society as a point of departure for abstraction, reanimates it, dusts it off. It becomes really interesting to me and supercharged. I just find that chilling and amazing. So what we have here is an example of an artist using abstraction to respond to social issues, to social contexts, to social histories. Here's his mixed media painting, Scorched Earth from 2006, which was shown locally at the Institute of Contemporary Art, about 10 years ago. And it's a major piece, 95 inches tall by 114 inches wide. And this was sort of the first time I'd even learned about the Tulsa racial massacres, and to have Bradford sort of be that prompt and using art as a language to really respond to and illuminate social histories, I thought was really powerful. And in this talk, we're gonna kind of end here as well. We're gonna end with thinking about how artists can, again, use their own artistic voice to talk about larger social constructs in their lives and in their imagination. But in the meantime, we are bombarded with images of social abstraction constantly. So on the left here is a metric, a visual data of sort of the different variants of SARS-CoV, and they're color coded, and North America has a big red dot, and then that goes off to Australia, which is blue, and Asia, which is purple, and Africa and South America, which are orange and yellow, and Europe, which is green, as if we're supposed to understand this and maybe internalize this into facts. But I have found that significantly challenging and found this kind of imagery absolutely inaccessible. On the same hand, we're bombarded with all of these numbers. So, this is a kind of COVID dashboard I've been following. And so 5 days ago, there were 8.1 million confirmed, COVID in the world, and now it's 8.9. And so it's a significant bump of 10%. Am I supposed to feel differently? How am I supposed to feel when the number was 4 million? How am I supposed to feel when the number is 12 million or more? The number of folks in critical condition is slightly lower, but all these numbers just seem bewildering and a kind of significant aspect of the social abstraction which confronts us today. But what I want to talk about is something I would kind of describe as far more sinister, far more pervasive, far more inaccessible, but something that's part of our entire social fabric, yet it's just filled completely with opacity, and those are our financial markets and financial instruments. And so when you look at this image on the right from Jim Cramer's Mad Money, April 8th, 2020. So you have this kind of conflation. Someone took a screenshot and shared it on Twitter, and it kind of went viral. So you see the conflation of the Dow's best week since 1938, but at the same time, tens of millions of Americans are losing their jobs. So how do we resolve this? How do we resolve Wall Street, which we can call the speculative economy, versus Main Street, which we can call the actual economy? What are the dilemmas of the two of them? How do they relate? How are they part of our lives? I know when I look at the news, I constantly see updates about the stock market, but yet I realize how little I actually know about how it functions or what's happened in terms of the stock market historically. So you can see in the Standard & Poor's index of 500 major stocks from 1960 to 2020 to last week, there's been an incredible amplification, not only from the tech bubble in the late 90s, but since 2009 with the Great Recession. And that, the S&P was at maybe 750, and since then has increased by almost a factor of 5 in 10 years. So how do we understand this? How is wealth on some level being multiplied by a factor of 5? But we also understand that stocks, 84% of them are owned by the wealthiest 10% of Americans. So right there is certainly an area where the stocks have made this impact, and certainly where they're not affecting the remaining 90% as much. We hear a lot about the US being, quote unquote, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, but we often don't see or not shown what that actually looks like. So I wanted to show a financial metric here, which is the gross domestic product. And what a gross domestic product is just the cumulative economic activity for any country. And you can see that the United States is significantly larger than all the other countries on this list. The US GDP is 20.5 trillion. And part of the reason why the GDP is so inadequate as a metric is that it rewards any kind of economic behavior. So an oil spill, for example, is good for the GDP because money is spent to clean up the oil and money is spent to replace the oil that was spilled. So this is something, this kind of inadequacy of financial metrics is something we can chat about a little bit later, I'll chat about. But if we look at the economies of Japan, Germany, UK, France, India, and Italy combined is smaller than the US economy, which is really shocking. And per capita, the GDP for each person in the US is $67,000, which is again, significantly more than the UK or Japan, which one would think has the same standard of living. And another surprising metric is that California by itself would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And even though its population is significantly smaller than England's, it has a much larger economy. So where these financial markets have certainly enriched is the 1%, and not even just the 1%, but the 1% of the 1%, which we can call the 0.01%. So here's a metric here about how the wealth of that group, which is their average wealth is $370 million, has progressed since 1960. And if we look at this metric, which is now dated, it's 3 years old from 2017 from the Forbes ranking, we can see how a lot of these folks are recognizable, but also associated with different well-known brands and stocks. So Bill Gates from Microsoft, Bezos from Amazon, who apparently is far exceeded Gates now and is worth over 122 billion. Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, which also owns Instagram and WhatsApp, Larry Ellison from Oracle, the Koch brothers, David Koch has passed away, Michael Bloomberg, Paige and Brin from Google, the Walton family, Sheldon Adelson from Las Vegas casinos, Steve Ballmer also from Microsoft, the Mars family. And so like when you eat M&Ms, M&M stands for Mars and Mars, Phil Knight from Nike, Michael Dell and Soros, who is apparently his wealth has now gone into his foundation. So, you know, how did this 0.1% get so wealthy? And I would say it's by design. And I think this is going to be something I'm going to return to over and over again, is that a lot of these abstractions are created by design. They're not organic, and they're certainly a sort of consequence of very specific policies designed to enrich very specific constituents. So if we look at the upper left, capital gains. So capital gains are money one makes from profits, from stock profits or from dividends. So that tax rate, which went up in the 1970s, up to 35%, is now been cut severely down to 15%. So these are this is money that folks are making directly off of profits from investments. So these are not people with jobs. This is not earned income. These are income from profits. And one could argue that these should be highly taxed because they do not represent labor at all. On the other hand, if you look at how our federal revenue has progressed, it's been really shocking. This is from 1934 to 2017. The percentage that is payroll tax. So these are people with incomes, and their incomes are taxed as they're working. So these are working folks. They've become a much larger percentage of the overall tax revenue for the country, with income almost rivaling income tax overall. And again, if your primary income comes from capital gains, there are so many ways to enjoy loopholes and find methodologies to avoid paying, to do tax avoidance, tax shelters and overseas tax shelters, etc. And this is why in this metric, you can see that billionaires are now paying a lower effective tax rate than the bottom 50% of earners in the US. And again, all by design. So recently on TikTok, there was a viewer who visually expressed Jeff Bezos' wealth by grains of rice. And I feel like this is one of the kind of obscenities which is broadcast constantly, is who's richest person in the world and how rich they are and what that means. And we don't really understand the kind of larger societal impact of what that is. So here, 1 grain of rice is $100,000, 10 grains of rice is $1 million, 1,000 grains of rice, or 10,000 grains of rice is $1 billion. And just to quickly describe the difference in metric between a million and a billion, I've heard the statistic that 1 million seconds is 11 days, but 1 billion seconds is over 30 years.
Ask me, well, how much does Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos have in terms of rice? 1 billion, Jeff Bezos has 122 of these, or 58 pounds of rice. If each grain of rice was 110. Look how big this is, guys. I'm going to show you the scale here. I'm going to put a keyboard in just for fun. Look how deep that goes. That's insane.
So it's amazing to see this visual of 58 pounds of rice is Jeff Bezos' wealth if 1 grain of rice is $100,000.
Ask me,
So this brings up the idea of capitalist realism, and thank you, Anthony Romero, for bringing this up in your wonderful talk as a Radcliffe Fellow. And you quoted Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism, There's No Alternative from 2009, and he states, capital realism, as I understand it, cannot be confined to art or to the quasi-propagandistic way in which advertising functions. It is more like a pervasive atmosphere, conditioning not only the production of culture, but also the regulation of work and education, and acting as a kind of invisible barrier constraining thought and action. And this idea of a pervasive atmosphere I found really powerful. And one can make the quick association that in the US, most things with use value are immediately monetized. And this relates to a kind of a larger idea of a kind of colonial wealth extraction, that how labor is used in a kind of exploited way, as well as the land through manifest destiny, and definitely the marginalizations of people of color, starting with Native Americans and then African Americans. And also I was thinking about capital realism in terms of art. Here's a piece by Gerhard Richter in 1963, one of his first sort of photo paintings, when he was thinking of himself as a capitalist realist, having left communist Germany and moved to the West, West Berlin. And he says about this body of work, capitalist realism was another form of provocation. This term somehow attacked both sides and made social realism look ridiculous, and did the same to the possibility of capitalist realism as well. And as we're talking about the word realism, I sort of thought about how a lot of the kind of semiotics of these terms are used kind of interchangeably, but often there's a little bit of confusion around there. So on the top here, realism in this sense, in social realism and capital realism, has one set of meanings, but realism in terms of a larger sort of political science meaning means a focus on the military, right? That quote unquote realists think about that might makes right, and therefore there's an arms race, and this realism, or kind of political realism, dominated the Cold War. Then there's the word liberalism and neoliberalism, and I think there's a lot of confusion around that, because liberalism sounds like being a political liberal as opposed to a conservative here in the US, but in fact its political meaning is totally different. So liberalism, thinking back to the time of Woodrow Wilson, is the idea that instead of having realism, where countries are at this kind of military stalemate, they can actually produce international institutions of mutual benefit, like the League of Nations and later the United Nations. So we can think about the WHO as being that. We can think about the kind of international court as being that. So liberalism is a focus on international institutions that could create bonding and therefore a lack of war or threatening between different countries. But neoliberalism is a totally different thing, is a focus not on political institutions to create this sort of centralized set of interests, but as a focus on economic institutions. And so like the World Trade Organization is a kind of neoliberal institution, as is the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. So because neoliberalism privileges money and capital so much, it's become an easy place for criticism, which it deserves, but let's not sort of confuse what neoliberalism versus being a political liberal means in the United States. So an idea I wanted to present out here is capitalist abstraction. So we have social abstraction, we have capitalist realism, and we have capitalist abstraction. So a lot of these sort of ideas are taken from Matteo Paspinelli's Labor of Abstraction from 2014. And so he references first Alfred Sohn-Rethel's Intellectual and Manual Labor, a critique of epistemology from 1978, where they talk about three kind of central forms of capitalist abstraction. One is the abstraction of language. So, how does language function within a kind of abstract manner? I immediately thought about, in late May, a White House economic advisor referred to out-of-work workers, these are people, as human capital stock. So again, they're not people or workers, they're human capital stock. And perhaps this is part of a kind of a larger agenda where, quite a number of powers that be are far more interested in protecting capital during this COVID crisis than the lives of people. Moving on from there is the abstraction of commodity. So here I want to show, since we're talking about Bezos, is a kind of larger stock window for Amazon. And you can see how the commodity of Amazon has amplified from, the stock was valued at $264 in 2013. 7 years later, it's grown by a factor of 10. So again, the sort of value, the kind of commodity, what Amazon actually does in our imagination really is a kind of online interface for goods, for consumer goods, and then it delivers those consumer goods. And so here, the idea of money surrounding the value of Amazon is certainly abstracted. And in the stock itself, and how these financial instruments work is a major abstraction of what money looks like and what commodity looks like relating to Amazon and to every other company which is public. Even more sort of sinister than this, and this is described by Michael Hart in the Introduction to Capital and Language, From the New Economy to the War Economy, 2008, and he says, finance, like money in general, expresses the value of labor and the value produced by labor, but through highly abstract means. The specificity of finance in some respects is that it attempts to represent the future value of labor and its future productivity. And I think that's a really, really important thing to look at, is this sort of financialization model, the monetary abstraction, which is embedded with the kind of technological abstraction. So if we look at what a lot of these numbers mean, Amazon, this was taken earlier this week, is worth $2,600 a share. And the range during the day is this, and the range during a year is this, and the volume of shares traded in one day is this, and the estimate a year from now might look like this. But in its market cap, it's sort of like, impact overall, it's valued at $1.3 trillion. But the thing I really want to focus on here is the PE ratio, which is certainly meaningless to a lot of us, but what that stands for is the price earnings ratio. And what that means is for every dollar that of profit made by this company, to what percentage is the stock valued? So Amazon is worth 124 times what its profit actually is. And this is because of the idea of the future value of it, that investors believe that Amazon is going to increase in value. Even the average stock is worth 20 times, what its profit is. And again, all of these amplifications are absolutely not accessible to the average person, to a small business owner, to a worker. They're only available in these kinds of financial markets. And when we think about options trading, one could trade the future value of something. So if someone believes, Amazon's going to go up to 2,800 in 3 months, you could trade a future options and you can sell that for, however much you want. And so people are trading their concept of the future value of the stock now. And, you could trade this months or years in advance. So a lot of it really has to do with the kind of speculative principle. And which leads to this kind of larger set of concerns. One thing I wanted to share, which I also found shocking, is, Amazon's profit margin, regardless of how high its price earnings ratio is and how much its stock it's worth, its profit margin is only 3.6% in terms of what it does, in terms of the retail market. And this is very aligned with Walmart, which is about 4%, or Target, or even like a supermarket. And this is why Black Friday is called Black Friday, is because that Friday after Thanksgiving is when most of these companies working at such slim margins go into the black as opposed to being in the red. So you finally make a profit, at that time of year. One thing I was really shocked to find out is that Amazon, from all intents and purposes, is a cloud computing company. So the operating income from the Amazon Web Service represents 77% of Amazon's overall operating income. So its profit, 77% of its profit comes from its web service, its cloud service. And so this is a really shocking thing to think about how many tech companies, if they wanted, could go into our real market and have this incredibly destructive impact just because most of their profits are coming from this whole other realm of technology. And so one can think about this kind of capitalism as being beyond the real and existing into a kind of cognitive or sensorial space, whereas precedence over labor, language, aesthetics, logic, science, and mathematics, and how it sort of fits itself so within a larger normative function, that it is so normalized, and the sort of metrics and graphs and numbers that surround the market are so pervasive. And there's a lot of dialogue about quote unquote free markets, and we're going to see quickly how not free these markets really are. So one can think about this collective dream, this hallucination of speculative value, thinking about one's concept and context of the future, having no presence in in now or in the past. And I thought about this normative function in terms of Michel Foucault's mental illness and psychology, where he says the norm's function is not to exclude and reject, rather it is always linked to a positive technique of intervention and transformation, to a sort of normative project. What the 18th century established through the discipline of normalization seems a power that is not linked to ignorance, but a power that can only function thanks to its formation of knowledge. So again, the stock market and its impact is so normalized. We hear about it on the news all the time, and whatever lack of access it produces, we feel is our fault, instead of it not being explained to us, but also it not being explained how it's almost an entirely speculative proposition. To kind of talk about PE ratio even further, here's a company, Papa John's, whose PE ratio is 2,500. Meaning that a stock is worth 2,500 times what its earning actually is. So apparently Papa John's earned 3 cents per share, but it's actually worth, the stock is $82.54 per share. And Papa John's is a major company. I've never been there. I'm sure the food's terrible. It has over 16,500 employees, over 5,000 locations in 44 countries. But this sort of remarkable abstraction of what its stock value is just so incredible. This might be the most shocking slide of my entire presentation, which is, I caught this headline in mid-March 2020 that the Federal Reserve was going to inject $1.5 trillion in a bid to prevent, quote unquote, unusual disruptions in the markets. And so it did this by buying bonds. And $1.5 trillion, incidentally, is equivalent to all of the student loans held in the US right now. And this was surprising to me because I thought the Fed's primary function was just to print money. So if you look at a dollar bill, for example, so this dollar is B, it's printed by the Federal Reserve in New York. And so you can find these all over your dollars, and they represent which Federal Reserve. So I thought the Federal Reserve was more of a passive, quasi-independent government institution. But what we find instead is that it has really been part of the design of the stock market, especially in the last 10 years, and that the Fed is actually buying things. And so here, before 2008, in blue, it had bought some treasury securities, and these are our debt. Our national debt is in the form of these treasury securities. So it's like one part of our government is buying debt from another part of our government, and it really seems like money is being moved from one part of one's pocket to another. However, a really powerful thing happens in 2009 in response to the Great Recession, is that the Fed starts buying a tremendous amount of assets. So not only does it start buying treasury securities and other debt securities, but in red, these are the mortgage-backed securities. And if one has a question about, how did the 2008 and 9 Great Recession happen, please watch the movie The Big Short, which came out in 2015 and really explains this really, really well. And so basically what happened is, instead of a bank giving out one mortgage, the mortgage would be sold and to create a kind of exotic financial instrument called, collateral debt obligation. And so that mortgage gets mixed up with thousands of mortgages and maybe some other loans chopped up into tiny little pieces, put together, which was thought to make it more stable. But because there wasn't actual money to support that, and because there was so little regulation on who could actually get a mortgage, and because there was a tremendous amount of fraud of who was sold a mortgage when they didn't have the income to support that and quickly went into foreclosure, those turned into these kind of toxic financial instruments. And so, with the booming of the stock market in the last 10 years, one would thought, the market has sort of recovered and all these wonderful things have happened. No, the Fed bought all of those toxic financial instruments, and it looks like it's owning about $2 trillion in these mortgage-backed securities. And in the last 3 months, it spent about $3 or $4 trillion more dollars. And so now it has about $7 trillion in assets. Which means that, is the Fed the primary backer and funder of the stock market? The stock market would not function at all without this incredible backing by the Fed, who can generate money as much as they want. Anyway, we'll come back to this a little bit. So, in the upper left is a quote by Frederick Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, attributed to both of them. It says, "It's easier to imagine an end to the world than an end to capitalism." And I don't quite agree with this quote. I find this quote, a little bit kind of imperialist, monotheistic, kind of comprehensive, that one large thing called capitalism has to be replaced by another kind of financial empire. And I think, if we analyze the design of this, a lot of this can be redesigned. So one thing you'll hear a lot is the idea of qualitative easing, which is something that's really come up. This is what the Fed is doing, qualitative easing. But the question is, well, what does this really mean? And what it means is that it's lowering the value or the quality of money by just making more of it. And it doesn't even have to turn on the presses and print more money. It can just create more money like a genie, out of thin air. And so this money is being put into the stock market to create liquidity. So a lot of companies can, borrow money really inexpensively. And here's an article from a few days ago from the Washington Post, which says, the Fed is addicted to propping up the market even without a need. And it quotes, "At this point, putting even more liquidity into credit markets already awash in it does very little to accelerate the economic recovery," meaning on Main Street, the actual economy. "What it does do, however, is hand an undeserved and unseemly windfall to corporate executives, bankers, hedge fund managers, and Wall Street investors." There's also something I've found out lately called the zombie company. And these are companies that don't make enough profit or enough money at all to pay the loans that they have. And all they do is borrow more money to pay back the loans they've had previously. And as the interest on the loans is being cut, they can borrow money more cheaply to pay back loans that were borrowed at a higher rate. One example of this would be Uber. Even before the pandemic, Uber was losing a tremendous amount of money, and now it's losing even more money. And so it's considered a zombie company. And unfortunately, about 20% of companies now are considered zombie companies. And I suspect in China, the number is even higher. And so what the Federal Reserve is doing is it's placing a floor under bond prices. It makes it possible for over-indebted, sales-starved companies to borrow even more to cover operating losses or refinance existing loans, allowing them to avoid, at least delay, the day when they cannot pay their bills. So if we look at, what the solutions are by design, I think, these solutions are many. Number one is divestment boycott. For example, if you're not a fan of the politics of the Koch brothers, even though the Koch Industries is private, they own consumer goods like Georgia Pacific Paper, so which is Dixie cups, it's quilted Northern bath tissue, it's Brawny paper towels. And you'd be shocked by who actually owns what in our world. Like Dunkin' Donuts is owned by 3 different private equity firms. Even other coffee companies, Peet's Coffee and Cafe Intelligentsia, are often by a different set of private equity firms. Budweiser is owned by a Brazilian, Belgian conglomerate. And so when you find out who owns what and what their politics are, I think you can boycott and choose to divest from them if you have investments in them. I have a kind of perverse idea of a kind of American balkanization where, is America, and the question I ask myself is America still in a kind of empire scale of a country, and would we thrive more as a kind of American union with multiple smaller countries? What if New England was a country, and California certainly can be a country? Also meaningful antitrust gestures to break up companies that are too big, especially banks, and Amazon. Does Amazon have to own Whole Foods as well as its web services, as well as what it does in the retail market? Meaningful taxation to return to a much more equitable form of that. Companies which remain private, like Trader Joe's, are owned by German billionaires who own Aldi, but because they're private, they can treat their workers better, pay them better, give them much more empowerment because there's no investor pressure or bank pressure on them. And overall, reevaluate market incentives and supports. If the Fed is going to put all its money to prop up the stock market, why doesn't it spend the 1.5 trillion to buy up everyone's student loans and charge them, 0.05% the way they're charging banks and other companies? Why can't what the Federal Reserve be used, or why is it buying mortgage-backed securities and not people's individual mortgages so they can stay in their homes? Also, I was really pleased to see the government of New Zealand released their national economic plan in 2019, and they decided they're going to pivot away from a growth-based economy and move towards a sustainable, inclusive-based economy. And again, these are all, it's capitalism by decision. So New Zealand was interested in growing and sharing prosperity, supporting thriving and sustainable regions, transition to clean, green, and carbon neutral, ensure everyone is earning, learning, caring, or volunteering, healthier and safer, more connected communities, which really relates to, metrics which are really, really inadequate, like the GDP or even the unemployment numbers, because those numbers are meaningless if we're not talking about whether the jobs are actually, jobs which can support life. Are those jobs where people can kind of sustain their own life instead of jobs where they're working poor? So how do we kind of modify things? And here are a range of metrics about quality of life from the International Journal of Environmental Studies, 1976. So moving along, I have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to sort of build an analogy between the art market, the art world, and the behavior of artists with these larger forms of social abstraction. So here we can see a one-to-one of here's the rise of the S&P market, over the last 20, 30 years, and here's the rise of the largest price paid for a single work of art. So in the early 90s, there was a Kiefer for 650,000, and last year or 2 years ago, it was a Basquiat sold for 110 million. And again, the art has this cultural value. It has a kind of scarcity value, that it's one of a kind, and it has a kind of amplified context and narrative. This is kind of a large quote from Hito Staro's Duty-Free Art from 2017, but I thought it was really interesting thinking about art as a kind of alternative currency and one that exists outside of any individual country. And this is where, a lot of investors have been thinking about art as an asset class, as a sort of version of speculative capital. So if one wants to diversify their financial portfolio, increasingly they're buying art. And Staro says, in duty-free art, rather than money issued by a nation or administered by central banks, art is a network, decentralized, widespread system of value. It gains stability because it calibrates credit or disgrace across competing institutions or cliques. There are markets, collectors, museums, publications, and the academy as asynchronously registering, or most failing to do so, exhibitions, scandals, likes, and prices. As with cryptocurrency, there is no central institution to guarantee value. Instead, there's a jumble of sponsors, censors, bloggers, developers, producers, hipsters, handlers, patrons, privateers, collectors, and way more confusing characters. Value arises from gossip, comes spin, and insider information. Fraudsters and con artists mix helter-skelter with pontificating professors, right here, anxious gallerists, and couch-surfing students. This informal ecology is eminently hackable, but since everyone does it, it sometimes evens out, even though at highly manipulated levels. It is once highly malleable and inert, slime, dopey, opaque, bizarre, and blatant, a game in which the most transcendental phenomena are on collectors' waiting lists. So, I came to this idea through this wonderful movie, The Price of Everything, which, is upsetting. And there's a range of characters from the artist Larry Poons, who achieved a lot of prominence in the 70s, to a contemporary maker, Njiketa Akunyili-Crosby, who's subject of this kind of speculative value, a major art collector, Stephan Eldis, and Amy Capolazzo, chair of fine arts in Sotheby's. Moving on, and these are some time, I'm just gonna skip across some of these videos to move on to here. And so, I'm curious about when art becomes subject to the speculative metrics of the financial world. So here is an idea of, different capital gains and how different artists, the value of a certain piece, rose to a certain degree. So a Tillman's went from being sold for $4,400 in 2005 to $71,000, or even more, the Basquiat that went from $136,000 in 92 at Christie's to $17.6 million in October 17. Actually, thinking about this, I am going to show this video.
These are still around. Jim Dine, Chuvro, Guston, Al Jones, Franz Klein, Target. There it is. $125,000. The surface is to die for because it has everything. It has spritzing, it has all the collage stuff. Very rich. I bought it for 10.
10 million. And he said,
Yeah,
and what would this piece be worth now?
$100 million.
Seems a crazy amount of money.
Seems like a crazy amount of money.
Do you think it's worth it?
Well, let's see. The stretcher is probably worth 80 bucks. Then we have some high quality canvas. I don't know what the cost of the piece.
But at the same time, this sort of auction scenario can also be incredibly destructive for people's careers when they're subject to other, speculation by different financial stakeholders. And so, we think about Esteemed Gupta, sold for $466,000 in 2008. 10 years later, it's only $75,000. And I've heard of examples of artists who were unable to maintain their auction prices, even though they received nothing from the auctions. And there are this whole other, as Hito Starr was talking about, all of these other ways that art becomes amplified in value without enriching and potentially hurting severely the artists themselves. Here's another clip about the auction of Crosby's work.
Now we have the Crosby here for 2012, the drum, and also the 100,000, 120,000, 150,000, 80,000, 200,000. Thank you, Amy. 250,000, 300,000, 350,000 now. At 350,000, Triforcer, 400,000. Amy, can't see now. 400,000 is Leslie's now. At 400,000, 450,000, 500,000, 550,000. So your bid, madam, is 600,000, 650,000, 700,000 now. 750,000, 800,000 now. 850,000. There it is at 850. 850,000. 900,000 now. At $900,000. So with Alex at the desk, and I'm going to sell it this time. Fair warning. That's $900,000. Thank you, Alex. L0075. And thank you, Amy, to your bidder as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Drown was sold at a show from a few years ago, and the person who bought it sold it.
They brought it to auction.
They brought it to auction.
They flipped it, basically.
Yeah,
That's what happened.
that's what happened.
I see.
Yeah.
You saw a flipper bought.
When I just thinking of what success means for me, I'm
Yes.
very interested in the long term. So it's not about making a lot of money in the next 5 years. I'm buying a beautiful house in LA, although that'll be good, but that's not my driving force. I'm very, because I keep thinking long term. What matters in the long term, the institutions you get into, the shows you get into.
Now we have
So again, other elements that support this are art storage in free ports. Cheryl talks about this a lot, where art can be held in these warehouses, which are on airports, like in Geneva and Singapore and Luxembourg and Monaco, where it's almost, the quality of a museum collection, but it is perpetually in transit because it is held at an airport. It is thought to be in transit, and therefore certain, value-added taxes are not added to it. Then we have art fairs, and who knows what the future of the art fair will be, but we do know art fairs have been booming in the last 10 years. And why would UBS, the United Bank of Switzerland, sponsor an art fair? So it turns out UBS got in trouble for using the VIP rooms at Art Basel for their Swiss bankers to connect with their clients and also to sort of solicit new clients. But yet again, so they got in trouble, but again, no jail time, maybe some minor fine, and yet this continues. The last two things I want to mention are, locally, there was an issue in 2009 when the Rose collection at Brandeis, because a lot of the donors to Brandeis lost a tremendous amount of money with Bernie Madoff, and in the downturn of the stock market, there was a movement to sell all of the art in the Rose Art Museum. And there was a huge pushback. I remember this article being kind of above the fold in the New York Times. And ultimately, you know, the museum persevered and thrived, but yet there was this moment where the real potential of the cultural value of this institutional holding was going to be liquidated and sold as an asset. And Stephen Eldis, who dies last year at the age of 93, ended up donating $500 million to the Orange of Chicago and this fantastic collection, which will be up for 25 years. And so even though he comes across as quite flippant in that section that I shared that video, you know, overall, there's a much more poignant moment where he talks about collecting this Mito Catalan piece of Adolf Hitler and he himself being a young Jew in Hitler's Germany and seeing Hitler speak, and what does it mean to have that piece in his collection. So there's sort of side effect, I would say, of the kind of collector class and where the money goes. But one incredibly negative one was what happened to Helen Molesworth, who was fired from MoCA Los Angeles. And she spoke about this last year when she was a speaker in our program a little bit, but not really, you know, mentioning the context where, you know, she was interested in showing the work of underrepresented artists and local artists and younger artists and artists of color and women, where I think there was pressure on her to show a lot of art that was in the collection of donors in the museum because they're enriching the museum, and so therefore they want some kind of reciprocity. And overall, you know, how museums are going to untangle these issues, I think will be one that's sort of a major one moving forward, as larger issues of museum philanthropy, surrounding issues of ethics. We saw this with Warren Kanders and what happened at the Whitney recently. So what does philanthropy look like? Or how do we think about, you know, the role of philanthropy as profiting from these manipulated financial markets? And what are different ways for this to sort of impact us on the ground and in person? And I wanted to kind of return back to our role as artists and thinking about how we can use art itself as a way to sort of address these various kind of social contexts. And I really love this quote by Jerry from March, where he says, you know, art's primary metaphysical building block is that which has never been imagined. And this is why I can say, and I know that art will go on. The reason is that art is an advanced abstract operating system devised for imagining the unseen, gleaning the group mind, a tool for inventing new protocols, experiencing rapture from form, explore consciousness, map reality, create constellations of unspoken communication that echo across millennia. Things that never change but are different for every person who sees it, and is even different every time we look at the same work. This is because art is the ability to embed the unimaginable in material. Creativity is a survival strategy. It's every bone in our bodies and always has been. Thank you. Well, now I want to throw it over to Jerry. Jerry, thank you again for joining us. And I wondered if you had some remarks you wanted to share. And I'm going to mute myself and you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? That was great, Ben. I'm amazed. You are a brainiac. I did not know any of it. And yet, of course, we sense it the whole time that, yes, I hate Jeff Bezos. There's no doubt about it. And I am jealous of him. It's a huge honor to be with all of you today on a Sunday as the angel of death still walks among us. And the biggest revolution of my lifetime is going on at the same time. I see a lot of names here on the screen, names I recognized. Peter Rostovsky, I see Jana Chikos. There's too many for me to read. I see others that I recognize and I'm a little intimidated. So forgive me for not understanding as much, but this is what I think I envy you. Once upon a time in the 1990s, I built this city along with about 100 million, no, along with about 1 million other people in the art world. It was torn down, it was gone, it was decimated by AIDS, it was broke, there was some other recession, the Reagan 80s had ended in a demoralized wreck, galleries were closed, everybody had to remake this art world. Now, of course, as you all know, and I think that art world, by the way, was big and beautiful for a long, long time. It let more people in, not enough, but it let more people in from more places at all times. It became global. It became too big. It became the art world that you guys all know. And it's always hard for me as a geezer to keep that in mind, that our answer to every question over the last, say, 15 years were the same two answers, which was to get bigger and busier. And these are not answers to questions at all. These just scale a problem up and up and up and up. And of course, the art world became, the meaning of the word catastrophe, it comes from Greek drama. What catastrophe is the arrival on the stage of a force that will bring pain and overturn things. A catastrophe exposes all of the fault lines that you see already. So when you have Oedipus walking around and he's about to stab a guy and you want to go, you were just told by the blind man at the gate that you're gonna kill your father, you big fucking idiot. And then he goes and does it. The catastrophe simply reveals the weaknesses already in the system. And when coronavirus arrived, it exposed it all. And it exposed it all almost instantaneously, didn't it? We saw what we already knew. The art world had become too top heavy, obscene with amounts of money that we all want. Your job, in a way, is to steal all of those Jeff Bezos types that he's talking about to get their money. The things you make in some fundamental metaphysical universe are sitting on walls, and this is what they do, or in rooms or on video or whatever form it takes. Your art basically goes, I see you looking at me. I saw you from across the room. Come closer. You know you want to. Come closer. I could change your life. Love me. I love you. Give me your money or whatever. In some ways, our job is to take their money. But the art world had become like a circus. It had become professional instead of eccentric. It had become mostly, notice the artists that Ben kept talking about, because in fact, the market is so dumb that the market is a self-replicating organism. You know what I mean. The market only buys what other people in the market have already bought. And it keeps repeating that and repeating it until it gets narrower and narrower. So you're not just buying, say, it's the same 55, mostly white, mostly male artists. Jeff Koons, you can hate him. He's made some great work. Andy Warhol, Gerhard Richter, Rudolf Stingel, you can hate on Damien Hirst, whatever. It doesn't matter. The insanity of that art world that you are going to rebuild, which is why I envy you. The insanity of that art world is too many of my kind. Not enough critics were writing criticism. All these goddamn art blogs kept reporting, and they still do it, for fuck's sake, on what art costs. I want all artists to make money, the good, the bad, and the very bad. I want you to make money. I want to make money. We're gigantic losers that have no other abilities in this world except to be outsiders, pirates, ne'er-do-wells, losers, hanger-ons, visionaries, shamans on the edge of the village who smell, who make things that somehow we have to convince the village that they need it. The interesting thing about art, my loves, is it has never not been with us. Never. It was there with us in the caves. Darwin said, he never said it's survival of the strongest or the fittest. That's a tragic misreading of what he said. Darwin said it is survival of those most able to adapt. That's you. And you are now in real time, adapting in real time. And notice the conditions you're adapting in are unlike any. Well, they're more like 99% of all the art made in the last 75,000 years was made in conditions like you are living in now, in smaller spaces, in more intimate surroundings. You're making art out of whatever is at hand, whatever's here. This is my bottle of water, I will make it into art. There are not gigantic factories of artists and their assistants working anymore. You are making art out of yourselves, with children working in the background, somebody cooking over there, Nana is back there doing the laundry, the dog is there. These are the conditions of adaptation, which mean creativity. These are the ways that art was made all of this time, and that we narrowed it and made like these 4 or 5 Death Stars mega galleries. Who, like Jeff Bezos and all those guys, they will probably survive, and maybe we will all work for them. We could all use $1 million a year job doing fuck nothing. That's what we all want. But the art world became obsessed with those 55 artists, mostly white, mostly male, mostly painters, but not always. And we only reported on what the art costs, where as much as I want you to make money, my loves, the price of art has nothing to do with its value. It's been completely turned around. I come from the art world that I helped build as 1/1,000,000th of that world. It was a smaller world, and it's going to be small again, my loves. Maybe 90%, maybe only 60% of the galleries that we knew on February 29th will not open again. 30, 40, 50% of collectors gone. The great chef David Chang estimates that 90% of restaurants will not open again. Performing arts spaces are incredibly in the balance right now. They can't usually survive more than 1 month going dark. Art galleries, most of them, my dears, are run as mom and pop shops. You have to remember, all of us are weird evangelical preachers trying to preach our weird gospel of salvation and aesthetic redemption and social right to congregations. How big does your audience have to be? Does it have to be 30 million, 20 million, a million? Could it be smaller? Those questions we stopped asking. You are itinerant preachers, as we all are, and those smaller galleries, a lot of them aren't going to make it. There's a hole in the dealer's arm where all the money goes. They don't make much money. Artists get 50%, the dealer gets 50, maybe it's the other way. I don't know how that works, but there's not that much margin in any of this, to use a financial word. But greed became form, and that was a problem. And we focused more and more on just those artists. So the art world I came from, as I started to say, because I'm all tangent all the time, and really, Ben, you have to come in here and shut me up if I've overextended my welcome. A few more things, and then go to the bathroom. I was a long distance truck driver for about 10 years. I was like you, I tried to be in the art world, but I listened to the demons that speak to all of you at 3:15 a.m. every morning that tell you, you're no good at this. You don't know what you're doing. You've got a bad neck. You don't know how to schmooze. You don't go to the right school. You don't know how to hang out. You don't have enough money, blah, yada, blah, yada. Ben is so smart. How am I ever going to learn all of that? Blah, blah, blah. I hear it. The day after I won the Pulitzer, the next morning I got up to start writing. At the desk I'm sitting in here. And I was just as afraid as I was the day I started writing. I was never trained to be a writer. I have no degrees at all. I never went to school. Your schools are too expensive. I don't know what this one costs, but it's a fucking racket. And a lot of art schools, incidentally, are probably not going to open again too. Museums are in trouble. Everything is in trouble, and that's to your benefit. I couldn't stand being a long distance truck driver. And after about 10 years in hell, and I don't wish that on anyone, it was bad. I realized I had to try to get back to home, which was the art world for me. I'm an art lover. I'm an art world lover, if that doesn't sound too sincere and stupid. And one day at a party in New York City, when I wasn't driving, somebody said, "What do you do?" And I just pretended, and I said, "I'm an art critic." And they said, "Cool." And I thought, yes, that's what the art world is. We're supposed to just come here and make it out of ourselves. And I started writing, and a long story short, I didn't start writing till I was 40 years old, and didn't start weekly criticism until I was 47. You understand? As big a loser as you are, I was a mega loser. That art world that I tried to get in, though, was very different. And it's going to be this way again. When I would call to make a delivery, say to Paula Cooper Gallery, one of the big galleries at that time, still a great gallery, I would go in there and she would open the door and give me cigarettes and coffee. She invited me to sit down with a young artist named Robert Gober, and we talked about the world. I would make a delivery to Marion Goodman, a really famous now dealer, and they gave me snacks. I saw pure art history in a diner with John Cage. I saw John Cage drinking coffee. I witnessed John and Yoko, the sum of all things, part the waves walking south on Madison Avenue. This was the art world that I saw, where everybody did whatever they wanted, what all you have to do, and that's gone. You are being tasked with building a new world. There's no market. We're all going to have to find whatever money is out there, and don't go running to every institution and say, I need $37,000 to cast this statue of somebody in bronze. Screw you. You will have to build it out of plywood, sheetrock. I don't care what you build it out of. You don't ask permission anymore. You just put the fucking thing up. If you want to dig a hole in the ground, you dig the hole in the ground right now. We are on our own. And that is total freedom. All those blogs about how much Jeff Koons makes and how much Stefan Edlis sold his collection for, good for them. Like I say, I'm an American. I'm a first generation American son of an illegal immigrant from Estonia, but that counts. I'm an anchor, baby. You are going to build a new art world. What you have to do to build this art world is to build it out of what art is about, which is passion, desire, visionary drive, your stupid ideas, the willingness to be embarrassed at almost every step of the way. I am embarrassed now as I speak to you. My backlash later will be terrible. I will have a hangover from it. But I try to deliver and be radically vulnerable self, to try to show what I'm really thinking and not have it be gamesmanship, which is about professional. This isn't about efficiency, which is the way the art world got. It's about eccentricity. That's what I said at the beginning. Viruses come, but viruses go. This virus will be gone. That art world will be partly gone. If you are like vampires and stay up late every night with other vampires, online, in person, you must, as artists, commune with others of your own kind. If you do not do that, I'd say you're lost. You all teach each other after the teachers have gone to bed. You all are developing new languages with your stupid art that people like me don't understand yet. New dialects. You will make stupid little shows, and if you build it, they will come. I promise you this. The old sharks, you don't need us as much. I'm scaled so high up in my writing where I now, because I wanted to address the general public. I wanted to speak about art, not in the secret handshake, gobbledygook, Mandarin bullshit jargon that we so cherish in our, say, school newspaper art form. Very glossy, very handsome, very good. I have no problem with it. I've never been asked to write for it for obvious reasons. I did want to address real people like Bob Ross or Sister Wendy, if you know who that is, and make art accessible. There's something else, and I think I'm finishing. You don't have to worry about getting the content of now, the deep content of now, into your work. You do not have to make a painting of Trump, with an axe in his shoulder. You can't do that. The reason is the content, the deep content of right now is already in your work. It was probably there just like I said about catastrophe, it was probably there the last few years as the cracks, the fissures, the rot was clearer and clearer to you. All I ask is for you to make what you're making. All art need be for me is convincing. If I don't like it, I ask myself, what would I like about this sculpture if this were the kind of sculpture I like? And I would give it a chance. That's what I want you to do with your work. Get lost. Be willing to be embarrassed. And God damn it, most important of all, you big babies, get to work. Thinking about art is great, but thinking is not making. Art comes from art. Yes, I know you're researching diligently. So am I. So is everyone. But put your butt in a chair, stop listening to the refrigerator calling your name, and get to work. I need you to work earlier in the day. I need you to sit down for 20 minutes or stand up for 20 minutes and give it. We are all in this to go the distance, my loves. And I guess all I would say to you is, you lucky, lucky, lucky bastards. That distance has begun. It's happening. It was on the edge, teetering for 15 years. People aren't going to travel anymore. To London for an opening, and then to Basel for an art fair, and then to LA for a museum show, and then to, Winnipeg for a studio visit. That's not normal. It was never normal. And you lucky, lucky, lucky people, you are being tasked with building a new world where even losers as big as me and Jan and Peter and the other names I'm not seeing on the screen, and Ben, even losers that big, found a way to make their way into this dysfunctional family of the art world. So please do that for me. Now, if people have questions or anything, or just leave. I'm sorry if I've insulted you. Follow me on my idiot Instagram. I'm alone 94 days with my wife. I haven't seen a human being. I post only when I get anxious, so forgive me.
Jerry, thank you so much. That was just like the shot of lightning we all need. I wonder if everyone could turn on their videos so Jerry could see you and see the people that he's making a difference for. These are our people.
Hi. I love you all so much. It's embarrassing. How many of you, raise your hand, have I ever run into in a gallery or a museum anywhere? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I love you. How many of you have I ever clicked a like on your Instagram or something? Only one? I'm a dick. Okay, well, it's amazing to see you. Are you all working, yes, or are you afraid and are demons? Tell me the truth. Okay, Karina, Peter, Mary, Chloros, Jessica, Dee, you're not working. Okay, Ash, get to work, you big baby. Tracy, I can't see. Oh yeah, Maria, Oliver, Oliver just goes, Jerry's such a creep. Kristen, I'm proud of all of you because it's hard. I know that. Anything you want to ask, and then we'll leave.
Yeah, so
Oliver, I didn't see Oliver. Wasso's here. I think he should get a mini MacArthur. Sorry, go on.
Oliver, maybe you can ask your question. You wrote me a question in there. We're trying to it looks like some folks got their things turned off, or we're trying to turn them back on. Oliver, yeah.
I tried to, am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you're fine.
All right, well, first of all, why a mini MacArthur? I can't,
Artists.
I don't give a big MacArthur?
No.
Yeah, I was just wondering about, it's like the art world is one of those things. I mean, the art world that you and Ben were talking about, that abstracted art world, is one of those things that we all talk about, and we all say that it has nothing to do with any of our lives and we shouldn't talk about it, and then we keep talking about it. And I understand that. I do too. It's a fascinating train wreck of a perverse sort of thing. But the truth is, it really doesn't have anything to do with most of our lives. And I agree with you that there's a real freedom in letting go, of the futility and bitterness and all of the sort of toxic cynicism that comes from trying to participate in a world that you don't even like. But somewhere between that world and this thing that you're describing as freedom, it seems to me is a space for real solutions, because poverty isn't freedom. Despite what the poets might say, poverty sucks. And I'm wondering if there isn't a way for advocating for things like public funding. I mean, I was talking to a student earlier today who lives in Huntsville, Alabama, and there is some sort of a former cotton factory or something, like in a lot of smaller communities, that's been turned into a local art center with galleries and studio spaces, and it supports hundreds and hundreds, thousands of creative people in this pocket of Alabama. And places like that are really vital once you step out of New York City and out of the auction houses. And I'm wondering why we don't spend more time advocating for that. And I know Canadians will tell you that there are problems with a socialized funding system also, but it seems we almost never talk about that. So if there's a question in there, it's I guess to you, Jerry, is that something you talk about, or to Ben? How either one of you?
Yes, I would say that I very much agree with this, that the space between, say, this quote unquote freedom, now that we're all screwed, and it does suck bad, and it sucks badder for a lot of people in different positions, genders, etc. Obviously. Local. Right now, we can't travel. It's not going to be easy for all of us to come to Los Angeles or Atlanta for the big festivals and the big museum shows in New York. So the idea, and I see this online all day, and I'm shocked that more idiot art critics don't do this. I see great work from Huntsville, from Canada. I want to move to all these places. The point being that local right now is a great space to be working in, and public funding is fine with me. I meant to people, don't not do what you were going to do because you don't have the money, because that will always be in the way. I hate to tell you, it's in my way right now. I still have a 15-year-old computer. It's gigantic. You can't see it. I don't know if I'm answering you, but.
Yeah.
I guess,
would say, well, sorry, just to interject.
Yeah.
While we are all local and we can't go anywhere, we are now all together in a room from various parts of the world talking to each other.
I love that so much.
Sorry, Ben.
oh, it's okay. I think for my presentation with my looking at, I think the average person, especially in America, is always told that, there isn't enough funding for X, Y, and Z. And I think part of the goal of my presentation is that, these are all by design. And if we wanted the money to be there, it could be there. And again, if in other countries where there is, public funding, they may not have the range. What's exciting to me about, the US economy, even though it's so unbelievably unequal, is that it's incredibly dynamic. So I remember meeting with artists in Copenhagen, and they say, we all try really, really hard to make work for the judges for the sort of funding cycle every year, and like that's who they make, that's their one audience, and that affects the kind of art they make. And there was only 6 teaching positions in all of Denmark, and you know there isn't a lot of private funding, but in America there's this incredible diversity. And I think my presentation is meant, hopefully, to be empowering in the sense that now if we can get information, which has often been unavailable to us, maybe that helps demand certain policy changes, which would be enriching for a much wider population.
Also, I want to add that we are now able to build an infrastructure anew of comfort, of communality, of agency, of compassion, you know, that this is in our hands. I think that's how I use the word, that it's a collective moment, the way I once experienced. But are there other questions? So
I think Peter had a question, and we don't want to take Jerry's time too much, so maybe.
I love this. This is, I have to go to
However
work
long you
after
want to be
this.
here, well, we love to have you. So you tell us when you're done with us. I think Jan had
Writing on a old painting, and those are mine. No, it's, yes.
I don't know. I mean, I wrote it in the comments, but I can ask it with my face. So I guess I'm curious. So you know, I appreciate this idea that the art world is sort of becomes diminished and more local, more regional, and it's definitely something I have a little bit of nostalgia for. In terms of when I first moved to New York, it was a much smaller system. It was much more neighborly. But it feels like the one thing that has changed very dramatically is that we've gone digital. Again, something that like patterns that are at this point kind of exaggerated. And it feels like that's not something that will change going forward. So I guess I'm wondering how, you know, both of you like agreed, like the art world will change. There will be a post-COVID art world, and it's a moment of great opportunity. And I'm wondering how you feel this new sort of mediated space will interface with that localized type of scene, if you want to call it that.
Ben? I can answer. Look, I'm a geezer, so I have to go to the museums to commune with the ancestors, even the annoying MoMA. I have to go there to return to the Garden of Eden to have that impact. It's the same way I need to hear ABBA or whatever. However, I'm not a purist in any way, and I'm old, so I've never done this. But if all of you can have sex online, for God's sake, I think we can look at art online, okay, and have it something of an experience. So I'm encouraged by it, although our technology, you can tell, is really tricky, and you can get Zoom blowout very easily, and depression, and you just stare at your face going, God, my neck has so many waddles. But I'm all for whatever it fucking takes, you know, no holds barred. Screw that. We are really on our own, people. That's great.
Well, I love when Jerry mentioned the sort of larger historical perspective of this, right? It's like, you know, we think about, you know, in the history of music, you know, we couldn't play music on our own until like 100 years ago. You know, before then, if you wanted to hear music, you had to have like a live orchestra there with you, and your favorite piece, you might only hear it 4 or 5 times in your entire life, right? And much like with art, if you're growing up in a smaller place, you know, my one grandfather was a fisherman who with a 6th grade education in Taiwan. And, you know, my other grandfather lost his father. He grew up in Greenpoint, lost his father to the pandemic in 1918 and had to change his name to sound less Jewish. And yet, you know, those worlds were incredibly tiny. And it's only in the last several generations that we even imagine these kinds of accesses and movements and transport. You know, I think an artist 50 years ago just probably assumed they wouldn't see most art. They would see it in like a black and white book. And so there's this tiny increment of time when we're like, oh, we can go here and we can fly here and we can do that. But I think that's a really small kind of portion in the kind of larger equation of art. Like I remember Olafur Eliasson came to MIT and was talking so beautifully about, the weather project he did at the Tate and how democratic it was. But then none of us will ever see that. Like that happened once and it's lost to history.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in and say, Jerry, thank you so much. How wonderful it is to see you. And I appreciate so much the perspective that you bring to our current awarenesses. It made me feel good to know that we were part of that art world that used to exist, and that one's previous to that. Who was it? Dave Hickey that said, the downtown scene was over in 1970. That was way before I arrived downtown. Just one or two little observations I wanted to make. So the gallery system has a history of about 150 years. It arises in the mid 19th century, and then voila, at the end of the 20th century, we start to go online. Bruce Sterling, the visionary, made an observation once that the seeds of the future are scattered in the present. And I think as the internet and our engagement with it began to develop, as this digital world began to take shape, we had a distribution network. That's what the galleries had. That was the power of that monetized art world. So, here the COVID and we're all online and we're doing this, we're not going to go, there's no reverse gear here. So that's just one observation, that the art world has already changed 10 times over. And this idea of the art world, which is something that Jerry and I and Oliver and, Peter it participated in, that one's gone. But think of how many art worlds exist. Huntsville, Alabama, the Winston-Salem area, I really do look to museums to re-engineer their agendas, to begin to bring quote unquote local art that they have in their collections out for display and distribution, to participate in the formation of really what I think is a new world order. And I agree with you totally, Jerry. We have to pull it out of ourselves. That's where it starts.
I think that's brilliant. I'm sorry if I didn't mention Jan before, and I just noticed there's 3 screens on this goddamn thing. So sorry if I didn't name check people. I guess one thing, Roberta and I would see 20 to 30 shows. Roberta Smith is my wife, the actual art critic in our family. I'm more like a folk critic. I don't identify as a critic or a writer. In any event, Roberta Smith and I, she is the co-chief art critic for the New York Times. You should read her, period. We saw 20 or 30 shows in galleries a week, sometimes more, because that was our job. Galleries that you never had to go to, and many that you've never heard of. For me, galleries are the interface. I'm less interested in institutions and in love with them. But for me, those are the great delivery vehicles of, I go there because that's where new art is shown. And now is a time maybe to build some. And as Jan is saying, we will instantly resume in museums the project that really took off during the Obama era, which was rewriting the canon, most obviously, and that is on temporary hold. But after Black Lives Matter and this revolution that's going on, there's no way, as Jan is saying, to go back. I like that she says there's no reverse gear. I will steal that.
Have it. I took it from someone.
Shit, writers. We are never not working. So that's all I would have to say. I don't want to yamble.
Kristen just sent, Kristen Powers sent a question to me. Do you want to ask that?
Well, sure. Hi there, I'm Kristen. I was just saying that earlier today when we were, I was in the curator's talk, and we talked with Piriana Calvacini, who is the curator at Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and how they've, got this piece down that they're continually turning over, which is called Facades, that's on the side of the building. And so we started just talking about, well, how can you reimagine the outside areas and walls, like turn the museum inside out, or at least on the inside of the building pointed out to the outside of the building, like cut through glass windows and stuff. And what would that look like? Like, how would, if you imagine the museums in a whole new way? And then I started imagining, well, what if you had one building talking to another building? And there was this, it kind of went to like a futuristic city or something where buildings are talking to buildings, or something like that. And that in and of itself becomes some kind of cool artwork. So I was just curious, like this idea of, in these times, of the buildings pointing outwards instead of inwards, what your thoughts are on that.
Kristen, very quickly, you are talking like the great man in black of the art world, the late Vito Acconci, who, that is that beautiful kind of thinking, turning buildings inside out, having them talk to each other. He was Lifestyles of the Poor and Famous. And I love your idea. All of you should just fucking do it.
We have a question from Jay Handy. Jay, do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Question: you just commented on the fact that you and your wife would go to 30 galleries, is it a week? And if the world is changing, and you mentioned that half the galleries won't be opening, what does a critic do then to see new artists? Where do they go? Have they now been pushed to the Instagram world? Or where will that bridge be put in place if in fact galleries are fewer and we're all doing it ourselves in our own basements, getting things going? I would argue it's digital. A critic needs to be sifting through, it may not be as good as real sex, but it's going to be art delivered via virtually.
A couple of things remind me to come back to Instagram. I didn't say there's going to be fewer galleries. Note, I just said many of the galleries that were open in February may not be able to make a bridge to the other side. Many will surprise us, many won't. And then will collectors come back? But there will be many more smaller, newer galleries. I would say that old sharks like me, we don't have to get all the way to the bottom. That used to be my job. Jan used to do it. I know Oliver, once upon a time, discovered an entire new layer of the art world. You need to get critics about your age, more or less, not the old ones, but to just come to your idiot shows, okay? Or whatever you're doing, if it's online. And about Instagram, may I give a few tips as somebody with 1 million followers across this stupid thing? And I know how to do nothing, fuck nothing on Instagram. I've never streamed. I don't know what that is. No one ever, Roberta and I don't see humans. So we don't know what Netflix is. I'm not ashamed. I'm just telling you, it's a tunnel life, man. Okay? Here's my recommendation for the Instagrams that I like. Post your own work. You're a deluded artist. Do it. Post your own work, no food, and please, no dogs. Post pictures of things you like, things that catch your eye. If this lamp next to my head looks cool to you, I don't care. Post it on your stupid Instagram. Get embarrassed. Post other people's work, for goodness sake. I see certain artists, they just post their own work. I don't just post my work. I'd like to. So cats, I don't know. Children are fine. I hate children, but I love that artists have children. I think that those children are the luckiest people on earth because they have studio practices at 4 years old, usually, and they see the world in a magnificent way. Kids are fine. I'm the godfather to a lot of them. I just can't bear them myself. Post work online. I find it every day. You've seen my idiot Instagram. It doesn't mean I love all of that work. It just means that it was convincing enough for me to think it's in play in some way for eyes. And many artists, they go on, they get discovered because of the stupid thing. I don't even know their names. I never meet anybody. I hate that. This is the best existence ever.
Jerry, do you have time for a couple more questions? How are you
Listen,
feeling?
I can do this all day.
Oh, wow.
You should go. I'm like Bruce Springsteen. I'll go 3 hours in geezer mode.
All right. Well, here's a question from Mara. Do you want to ask it, Mara?
Sure.
Yes.
Hi, Jerry. Are
Hi,
you
Mara.
aware that many artists bypass dealers by selling their work directly through Instagram?
Wait, I missed the first part of the question about.
Are you aware that the gallery system, that the dealer system has been bypassed by many artists who are selling directly through their Instagram sites?
I think, Mara, when you say it, I am aware. And of course, I adore that. You know, as I said at the beginning, your job is to squeeze some money out of these goddamn people with it. And I know that many people want more than to just sell their work. You know, you all want to dance naked in public for people. If you just sell it, that's pretty good. You know, you're happy, but you also need to be dancing around and get some attention about your ankles or whatever. So I love that, Mara. Are you doing that?
I haven't started, but many of my friends have been doing it for years. And I find it the most exciting development.
I have collectors DMing me constantly going, who is this? Who is that? I always, when I see the DMs, I write back and I say, I have no idea who they are. It's easy to find them. I left a hashtag.
Proud of your of not being technologically savvy.
You have no idea. Oliver knows.
I see a question from Blake. Blake, do you want to ask that question?
Hi there. Yeah, my name is Blake, and I've been having a lot of trouble recently with Instagram and Facebook, and I'm wondering, like, how do we reconcile being participants in and creating value for a company, that's Facebook, which owns Instagram, that seems to be actively working to destroy our American democracy through its political ads strategy or policies? Like, it seems like a moral quandary. The reason most people don't leave Facebook is because that's where everybody they know is. So if you're on Facebook, you're creating motivation for everybody to stay there. Instagram too.
Blake, of course, you're not wrong. There are paradoxes. Art's greatest weapon is the ability to embrace paradox of two things, really 30 things, but two things being true at once. I do not use Facebook anymore for a completely different reason. I just find it's all people like my age still discussing the same shit. However, I am aware that every time I post on Instagram, you know, somebody's wallet's getting bigger and Trump's blah, blah gets more weaponized. The point being, I don't have an answer, but I'm going to use what I've got, and I don't have much. So I know that you kids will invent and find new TikToks left and right. That Instagram will be a bygone technology in 8 or 9 years. We won't even know how to upload it anymore. If you go back to my account, it'll be like a MySpace thing.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Jerry? Yes, I saw a hand. Please just unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Nice cat, Jessica Lau.
I had a
Yeah, Tiara.
hi. So I was curious if you had any recommendations for online forums and groups and websites to connect with other artists. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but I know that that's not artist focused. So I'm curious if you have any recommendations.
Tara, I do not. As an older person, I'm indiscriminate. I just scroll and scroll and scroll when I have work block for just 10 minutes, but I can learn a lot. So I'm afraid I don't. I do think that there needs to be a few more art blogs because they really have zeroed in on fun gossip about other people's bad news and expensive art by the same 55 artists. So I do think that critics are not playing their role, younger critics. I used to make 200 studio visits a year, you know, and get pneumonia constantly from people like you. I hate you all, every one of you. And I will never have immunity. You see, I will never set foot again as a 69-year-old into that world. I'm going to go. I'm going to put a hazmat suit on and I'm going to tell the gallery owner, leave the fucking door unlocked, give me my own checklist and get out of the gallery. I'm coming in and I'm going out. I've already told them this online, but I don't know how you find each other, but I know that artists always have. You are the new underground. People like me are not dismantling ourselves. I think about it. I swearing on the gods I think about it, but if I quit and make space for other people, then I go broke, I have no money, I don't have a good excuse, but nobody's undoing themselves, so you're gonna have to do it.
Jerry, I had a question about kind of criticism overall. And, you know, there's such a lack of rigorous, comprehensive, sort of far-thinking criticism. And this is, you know, part of the reason I feel so indebted to what you've shared with us, because we're so bombarded with a lot of noise on a daily basis, which has a very short half-life, and all of a sudden it disappears. So I really appreciate this sort of longer term thinking. And I'm wondering if you could say a few words about artists initiating that or the kind of lack of that in our larger sort of culture.
I am surprised that more artists, of course you don't know how to write, you artists, because you say you don't know how to write, but you write more in a day than your 50,000 years of ancestors wrote combined in a lifetime. So you just write how you talk, you big babies. Write in your own syntax. Keep it simple, stupid. Can you explore deep, far-reaching ideas that way? Of course you can. Of course you can. I am surprised that more, listen, if you start writing, people will start paying attention. That's all I can say. So wear whatever goddamn hat you want, form gangs with one another, protect each other at all costs, go destroy other gangs, but not too young. You can don't come after me, please. I'm at the end here, but if you have to, I accept it. I have elephant skin, and you cannot be defined by rejection. I'm rejected all day long. Have you ever seen on those threads the names people call me? So people will say, "You're an asshole," and then I will simply try to write back, "Dear Mr. or Ms. Juju69, I'm sorry you think this," and try to engage. That usually helps. I forgot where I was going with this, but you can't let all the rejection be your define you. And really, before this day is over, my loves, before this summer solstice ends, this incredibly important day to our species, where the sun shone right through Stonehenge, where the light fell this morning, if you look at my idiot Instagram, in Rome's Pantheon, exactly in front of the altar. Use this day to make an enemy of envy. Envy looks out at others and sees what they have. Envy is in the service of others, and it's very destructive, and it will eat you alive from the inside. And unfortunately, envy then leads to, for me, I have two rules on my Instagram and all my social media. You may attack me, but you may not attack anybody else. That seems to keep things going without getting too crazy. The other is I block cynics. When people say, "Oh, the only reason Cecily Brown made a big painting is because she can make more money," I don't think anybody knows why anybody does anything. And we all are, it's a miracle all of us got here to this day. We are there's so much abuse and damage and weird life behind all of us, in our blood, in our bones, in our histories. You don't know why other people, listen, that idiot Jeff Koons is sincere. Doesn't mean he's that good, but he means what he's doing. And if you are envious,